This brings the Studio Ghibli whimsy, cute vibes. This book was so unique and interesting. Like, what more could you ask for in a fantasy romance book? Hello people of the YouTube world and all who are watching this. I am Mackenzie901K. In today's video, we're gonna get into some book recommendations. So we're gonna be going through today and we're gonna be talking about some fun fantasy book recommendations. We're gonna be doing it based off of moods. So I do have about 12 different prompts for moods. Depending on what mood you're in, these are some potential options for you to read. Some of these prompts I do have more than one book for, but most of them are just going to be one book. Also, synopsises, as always, are going to be right here on the screens. Okay, so I think without any further ado, let's go ahead and let's jump into the recommendations based on your moods. So the first little category that I have is for I want to get into fantasy. I thought this was a good little category to start off with because maybe some of you are new to fantasy and you've been in the mood recently. You've been seeing all these interesting fantasy books come out. You've been intrigued. So the two recommendations that I have, it is the two most basic options, and that's Fourth Wing and Powerless. We'll start off talking with Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing, the plot is there, but it's more focused on the romance, especially in the first book in the series. This is so romance heavy. We're following, of course, our main girl Violet, who goes into this school. She kind of gets, honestly, forced into it a little bit. It's this dragon riding school. They're dragon riders. She has wanted to be a scribe her whole life, but she gets thrust into this because her mother is like a general or something. So that's kind of where the story goes. It really is a very simple plot, simple story, simple world building. It is a very character driven book, so if you are looking to get into fantasy, this definitely should be where you start. And then we have Powerless. I could go on and on all day about Powerless, but the same kind of idea. It's a very simple plot. We're following our girl Peyton Gray. She is an ordinary living amongst a world of elites, and pretty much Peyton has to enter this competition for elites only, and if they find out she's not an elite, that she's just ordinary, it's not going to end well for her. We also meet this guy named Kai. Peyton actually saves Kai's life, and that's kind of how she gets thrust into this competition, but it is such an easy going book. There's not a lot to it, not a lot of complex world building. It's still so fun and so good, and what makes this story is, again, the characters. I'm a character person, and if there's good characters, I'm gonna love the story, and that's what this brings to the table. That is why you should first read these if you decide to get into this fantasy genre. Next little category that I have here is a standalone fantasy. I love a good standalone. There's a few books on this list that are standalones, but I did just pick one book for this category because I don't want to be repetitive, and some of these books fit into, honestly, multiple categories. But the one that I picked for this is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This book was just so fun and so good. It's got the magical library setting. We're following our main girl Elizabeth. Elizabeth lives in this library, and something happens to the director of this library, and it gets pinned on Elizabeth. The whole book is following Elizabeth trying to prove her innocence and figure out who actually caused the bad thing to happen. But it is such a good, fun read. There's also a little novella that you could read as well, but it's perfect as a standalone. Oftentimes I'm finding myself wanting to read standalone fantasy because there are so many good fantasy series that you can get into, but I feel like there's not too many standalones, but this is perfect if you're in the mood for a standalone. The next little category that I have is atmospheric fantasy. So I often find myself really enjoying the books with a whimsy type of atmosphere. That's often I'm finding, especially here recently, I'm finding is what is giving me those 4 and 5 star ratings. So the 2 books that I have for this category are Six Crimson Cranes and Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. We'll start with Six Crimson Cranes. I recently read this not too long ago. Honestly, it is the whimsy that made it for me. We're following our girl Shori, and Shori gets cursed. When she gets cursed, her brothers turn into these cranes. They have crimson crowns on their heads. She ends up with a bowl on her head as well, and you're just following her going through trying to break this curse. The best part about this book though is honestly not the plot, it's the vibes. You're sucked into the atmosphere of the book. It's the way it's described is just so whimsical. It quite literally, if you're interested in Studio Ghibli movies, if you're interested in that vibe, this brings the Studio Ghibli whimsy, cute vibes. I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's so, even the cover is just so stunning and giving that whimsy. Same thing with Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. We're following Emily Wilde in this story, and she pretty much is going to this new place in order to study these fae for her little, is it in it? Yeah, it's an encyclopedia. Duh, it's on the cover. She's studying these fairies for her encyclopedia. Once again, it's the vibes. It's the vibes of this book that make it. Honestly, the plot in here, I'm not gonna lie, is a wee bit boring, but it's the vibes and the whimsy that Emily Wilde describes throughout the story. That's what does it for me. Just the descriptions of the fae, how the fae live, how the fae work, what they look like even, is just bringing all of the whimsy, and I love it. Just the way she describes the world, it's top tier. If you are looking for 2 atmospheric reads, Six Crimson Cranes and Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies will do it every single time. The next section that we have is a historical fantasy. I've just now recently found a love for historical fantasy. I never really used to read it, but there's one series in particular that I could go on and on and on and on about, and that is the Infernal Devices series. This is in the Shadowhunter world by Cassandra Clare. We're following our main girl Tessa. I believe this is set in like the 1800s. It's Victorian London. We're just following her, honestly understanding what's going on with the world and getting introduced to the Shadowhunters and kind of what they do. And I've just found a love for historical fantasy, especially historical London. It's just so fun, and I love that time period. I'm reading another series. It's not a fantasy series, but it is like a historical mystery series. It's called the Veronica Speedwell series. That time frame is just so good. It's so good. It's so fun, and I love the descriptions of that time and just seeing how stuff evolves throughout time, especially with this series where Cassandra Clare has written the whole Shadowhunter world through multiple different points of time. I do love me a historical fantasy. It's so good. Now we have specifically talking about fantasy romance. We have the fantasy romance category. If you're in the mood for some fantasy romance now, I'm not gonna lie to you. All of the books that I've mentioned so far do have some romantic subplots in them, except for like Fourth Wing and Powerless. I would consider those more main plots, but most of the books that I've talked about so far, those are romantic subplots. The first book is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. This book is following our main girl Bree. Yes, and Bree's sister gets stolen away by the Fae, and then Bree pretty much has to go into the Fae world and retrieve her sister. The reason that I'm saying that this is more fantasy, or this is more romance than fantasy, is because it generally just feels that way. I mean, you can kind of tell by the cover what's gonna go down. I mean, there's 2 guys back here, and that's all I'm gonna say about this, because I could go on and on about this book all day because I love it so much. Same thing with the next book here. This is Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. So Fear the Flames is actually getting re-released later on this year. I believe it's getting published in September, and I'm very excited to read it. I'm very excited to do a reread because I actually really enjoyed this book last year, and once again the fantasy, it kind of gets put on the back burner. The romance is definitely the forefront of the book. In this book we're following our girl Elowen, and she pretty much has to go on this mission with Cade. It's been a minute since I've read this book, so I don't remember too much about it. I do remember all the romance. Cannot wait until it gets re-released again because I've heard that the new edition of it is gonna have even more romance. Like, what more could you ask for in a fantasy romance book? Okay, now we have a witchy vibe. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really in a witchy mood right now, but when it hits fall season, I'm definitely in a witchy mood. There's two books in particular that when somebody says to me, hey, I want a witchy fantasy book, I say, I got you. And then I get these two. So first we have The Nature of Witches, and then we have The Crimson Moth. The Nature of Witches is what I'm going to talk about first. This is following our main character, Clara. I don't understand how I forget her name because it's literally about dogs. We're following our main girl Clara, and Clara kind of struggles with her powers. She doesn't really want to be the witch that saves the world. She's what's called an Everwitch, and Everwitches pretty much have all 4 seasons. Like, most witches only pull their powers from one season. She pulls from all 4. That premise alone is so interesting on how Rachel Griffin writes that out. It's so unique. I gave this book a 5-star. If you haven't watched my 5-star reads video yet, I gush about this book in that video, and honestly rightfully so because I love it so much. And the witchy vibes are all you could ever want. I believe they're also at a witchy school. Such a fun time. Then we have The Crimson Moth, aka The Heartless Hunter in the US edition. I'm obsessed with this book right now. I'm recommending this book to everybody that I come into contact with. I love it. It honestly is reminiscing of Powerless to me. That alone just makes me so happy. This one we're following our main girl Rune, and Rune by day is a socialite, by night she is the Crimson Moth. The Crimson Moth is the person that goes and helps save the witches from pretty much this evil group that wants the witches gone because they think that they're evil. And the way she does the witches magic in here is also once again very unique. I just, overall, if you're looking for a witchy vibe, this book is so good. It had me hooked from the beginning. I love these two. I love these two so much, and honestly low-key want to do a reread this fall of these. We're doing a little switch. We're going in a little bit of a different direction for a second. Now we're going to talk about cozy fantasy. Cozy fantasy is a genre that I have struggled with because oftentimes I find also if you hear the thunder, it's just ambiance because it is currently about to storm. Enjoy the storm ambiance. Cozy fantasy is always a genre that I've struggled with because I find myself picking up and expecting to love a cozy fantasy and then not liking it because I think it's really boring. So I do, however, I think I have brought a couple books to the table that are cozy fantasy but not boring, and they're still fun. So the first one that we have is A Fragile Enchantment by Allison Saft. This book was so unique and interesting, and honestly, if you like Bridgerton, here you go, because it is so reminiscent of Bridgerton, and I'm not gonna lie, it was still a little bit of a slow book, but if you know that going into it, which I already did, you will still enjoy it. I really enjoyed the magic system in here as well. We're following our girl main character, whose name I still don't know how to pronounce. We're following her, and she is pretty much hired to be this royal suit maker for our main guy Kit, who is getting married. Romance ensues. There's also a thing in here, I believe it's called the Tattler. It's like Lady Whistledown. If you've ever watched Bridgerton, it's just like a gossip column, and that alone so good. And also our girl main character, she can make clothing with magic weaved in. So interesting how people can come up with stuff like that. So that is why I love this book. It definitely does give off all the cozy vibes as well. It is such a fun read that still keeps you interested, but does have that cozy low stakes element. And then we have the very secret society of irregular witches. This one, so good. This author is coming out with another book, I believe in like September as well, and I am so stoked because I absolutely ate this book up. I enjoyed it so much. We're following, what's her name? Mika? We're following our main girl Mika, and she is tasked to pretty much teach these 3 young girls how to control their magic, because in this world witches are not really supposed to be a thing. They can get into a lot of trouble. They go through a lot to hide their magic, but how these girls find Mika is actually, I believe, like their caretaker, I believe. He finds her on YouTube or on like some type of YouTube virtual platform. I think that that is the funniest thing, and she's posing to be a witch. And that alone intrigued me, and that is why I'm so obsessed with this book, and I cannot wait to see what this author does next. But the cozy vibes are immaculate. Once again, just a low stakes fun book with some fantasy in it, some coziness, and it's great to bundle up in a blanket with and just have an enjoyable time. Next up we have some gothic vibes. I also don't really dabble too much in the gothic fantasy side of things. I need to dabble more in the gothic fantasy side of things. However, it is okay. We're trying to expand from just strictly reading fantasy that I'm comfortable with, but I do have one recommendation, and that is One Dark Window. I really love this book. I still am yet to read the sequel to it, but from what I can remember, this book was such an enjoyable time. It definitely gives the gothic vibes. We're following our girl Elspeth, and Elspeth has this nightmare living in her head that talks to her and things like that, and he protects her. There's like this magic system as well in here with like these cards. It gets into it. It gets into the gothic vibes. It does, as you're reading, it does really feel very creepy and eerie. Honestly, that's kind of why I love it. The whole time you're reading it, it really just does feel like you're in like this, you could be like near this gothic castle. It just gives all the gothy elements that are needed to make a good gothic story. The next category that we have is fantasy kind of set in modern day. Now, I know a lot of people don't really vibe with fantasy set in modern day. There's one series in particular that I did vibe with, or at least the first book in the series. I've not read the second book, but that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I loved this book. When I originally read it in 2022, I believe, I absolutely ate this book up. We're following, I think this girl is also named Bree. She is named Bree. We're following our main character, Bree. She goes to this school that I believe is kind of like a college, but I don't believe it's necessarily a college. She goes there, and the first night there, she witnesses this like magical killing. They try to wipe her memory for what had happened, what she had witnessed. It doesn't work. And then she's kind of thrust into this secret society. It touches on more than kind of what I'm going into it. It touches on topics like racism. It's also a King Arthur retelling. It was so good. Definitely one of my favorite fantasies set in like the modern era. Next we have a fairy tale vibe. There's one series in particular that triumphs all fairy tale vibe series, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart. Now listen, I know this is a very popular series, but if you have not read this yet, for the fairy tale vibes alone, it is so good. It literally feels so whimsical and magical, and you're sucked in from the beginning. So in this one, we're following our main girl, Evangeline Fox. Evangeline makes a deal with, she asks the Prince of Hearts, Jax, to stop a wedding, and in return she would help him. You just kind of follow her from there, going on this adventure with Jax and being tied to a fate. And that's all I'm gonna say about this, because the fairy tale vibes are immaculate, and it's one of my favorite series. The next little section that we have is a cute little section. It's not really a section for a lot of people, but if you're looking to get into this little genre, I recommend, highly recommend. And this is graphic novels that are fantasy based. I love me some graphic novels, and I have two here that I am absolutely obsessed with. First one is the Tea Dragon Society. Graphic novels honestly are just perfect for if you are doing like a readathon and you need to kind of switch things up a little bit. This is gonna be perfect for you. I don't really remember what this one is about, so you're gonna have to read what's on the screen for this one, because it's been a long time since I've read this. I just remember that the vibes of this book are so immaculate and good, and I'm honestly just so obsessed with this. And it's a little trilogy. Just based on the cover alone, I mean, come on. It's so cute. And there's little dragons in it. Who doesn't love a little dragon? And then we have a new one that I've kind of found recently that I'm honestly still in the middle of, but I am loving it enough to make it a recommendation. And this one's called Lightfall. And this one is following our main character B and Cad. B one day is out and about, and she meets this guy named Cad, and Cad decides that he needs to go speak to B's grandfather, which is a pig wizard. So they go back. He's not there. Her grandfather is not there, so they have to go on this journey. He leaves kind of a suspicious sounding note, has to go on a journey to figure out what happened to him, and the story just goes from there. And it's so cute. Just the art style is so perfect. I'm so obsessed. I've never heard anybody speak about this before, but if you are in the market for a great fantasy graphic novel, here you go. I'm so obsessed with that. That book is one of my new favorite graphic novels of all time. Alright, so now we're on to the last category of the video, and that is a fantasy series that feels like home. If you are wanting to find a fantasy series to dive into that will suck you in and make you feel like you are there, then you need to read ACOTAR. I know, it is such a highly recommended book, but if you've never read it before, it is so good. This series is home. It is, and it's the characters, it's the world, it's the plot, it's everything about this book. It's just, it feels like home. We're following our main girl, Feyre, and Feyre's out hunting, and she kills a wolf that turns out to be a fae, and she pretty much has to go live with this fae lord, and she ain't happy about it. She has to go stay with him forever. It was either that or she would get killed. So that's what this book is about. That's what this book follows. If you've never read the series, or if you've never continued the series, this is your sign. I'm obsessed with this series, and it is my home away from home, quite frankly. With that being said, that is all of the books for today's video. I hope you guys found some new books to talk about. I'm trying so hard not to talk about popular books, but if you've never read some of these books before, you absolutely should read them. Also, let me know if you guys like the mood-based recommendations, because I'm honestly kind of wanting to do this for like romance, mystery, just different genres than just fantasy. So let me know what you think down below. Also, if you have any more book suggestions, leave those down below as well, and we can chat about them. And if you agree with me on any of these, let's chat about them as well. If you've read them, let's chat. That's it for the video. Make sure you give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It makes my heart smile. It helps out the channel. You know how it be around here. Also, make sure you tap that subscribe button as well as that post notification bell. I do try to upload every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. EST. That doesn't always happen, so make sure you've got that turned on. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.